Good morning, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. Now, this morning, we are going to look briefly on the U.S. military, on U.S. militarism. Let's not say U.S. military, but U.S. militarism, right? And imperialism. Because as we said before, we have said often on this channel, nothing is wrong with having a military. A military is necessary for defense, not for offense now, but for defense, to defend your country and to ensure that your borders are protected. So the United States does need a military, just like any other country, to defend its economic, political, religious interests, and all of these interests that we know we need to protect if we want to be a free and independent country. However, when we speak about militarism, we're talking about a military that seeks to control the entire world and wants to bully the world, as it were, and to suggest that I am in charge and you should do whatever I tell you to do. Or if not, then I will come and bomb you, right? I will come and maim you. I will plunder everything that is in your country. Now, that is not something that the United States founding fathers wanted the US to do, at least not what the Constitution says, because we can't say what they wanted or did not want because we don't know that. And based on what we're hearing now, or the revised history of the United States, right, seems to suggest that from thence, these founding fathers, even from then, had empire in mind, right? It's sometimes very difficult to see that from based on the Constitution that they wrote. But let's now be clear here. One, when people write things, it does not mean that they believe what they have written. I have said that before, right? So don't believe somebody because they write something. It means, therefore, sometimes they're writing it just to show that they know. Sometimes they're writing it also to deceive you, to let you think that they're progressive when they are regressive. I was listening to a program yesterday by Glenn Greenwald, and Glenn Greenwald is a journalist, an American journalist who resides in Brazil. And he was talking about the Surveillance Act that has just been passed in Congress. Well, I think it has just, another time been enacted, because that's what the Patriot Act was about. The Patriot Act was about containing and surveilling America, restricting, I should say, Americans' freedom or freedoms. So that particular act was the whole matter of spying in on what Americans are doing. So the US government has the right, as it were, based on the Patriot Act, not based on the Constitution. And Americans need to understand that you can't have Patriot Act 1 and 2 and the Constitution functioning at the same time. And the Patriot Act came in about 2002, after 9/11. It was written before 9/11, but it was enacted, right? In 2002, thereabout. Yeah, so the fact of the matter is that you've got to go online and do a research on what the Patriot Acts are about, Patriot Act 1.0 and Patriot Act 2.0. In some cases, I also understand that there's a Patriot Act 3.0. And when Obama came into power, he continued to, to endorse that law, the Patriot Act. So Americans have to understand that they're living in, what should I say now, a post-constitutional world, right? Your constitution is not functioning anymore. And that is what Americans need to understand. The Constitution of the Founding Fathers has been supplanted by another constitution, which is really the Patriot Act. What we do have, we can say, are still remnants, thank God, of certain institutions that function. And because they function still, it sort of gives some, hit back, it's some pushback rather. It gives some pushback, lends some pushback to what these people who have been wanting to institute and to implement, I should say, the Patriot Act for all of these years. And they want to do a full enactment of the Patriot Act. It's time for us to wake up now, people. We have been sleeping. We have been sleeping for too long, and now we have awoken and we're wondering what has happened. How did we get here? Because you were in a deep sleep. You know, when you're in a deep sleep and you wake up and you're wondering what's going on, what was really happening? You know, what's going on around me? And because many of us have been sleeping, those of us who have not been sleeping, and it's not to suggest that we know everything, right? Those of us who have been reading and assessing US empire and other matters, it's not that we know everything, because I don't know everything. There are many things I don't know. But the important matters, you ought to know the major issues of the day you need to become aware of. And many of you are just so much immersed into what you want to immerse yourselves into. And then you find yourselves totally deceived by situations that you should know that are around you, that surround you. But you decide to ignore them to your own detriment. So we shall be looking briefly at the US empire. And I just wanted to open up with a statement that I've already quoted here many times, but I shall quote it again because many of you need to, things need to be repeated to you for you to understand, for you to remember, because you often forget. It reminds me of a Spanish teacher that I had. And when she wanted to emphasize something, she would always say, repita, repita, right? Because the more repeated what she said, she thought that we would remember what the vocabulary word was. So the same thing, you have to be, you know, it seems to me that I have to do a lot of repetition for you to be able to grasp and to fully digest the points I'm trying to make in my videos. So we are here, and this is the book. And I'm saying to you, you need to go and buy the book. Many of you don't know, you don't have the scholastic, you know, capacity like Chalmers Johnson. You don't. Many of you don't out there, including professors, do not have the scholastic capacity as Chalmers Johnson does. And this book is, I can say, a politically inspired book, right? The Sorrows of Empire. What a book that he wrote. The title is just captivating already. And that's what captivated me when I read his book some years ago. And Militarism, Secrecy, and the End of the Republic. The end of what republic? The end of the United States as we know it. It doesn't mean that the United States is going to fall as a country. It means that the republic that you know of freedoms is going, all right? And is rapidly declining right before our eyes. And, you know, this is what caught my attention, is introductory chapter, in Chalmers' introductory chapter. And Chalmers was, by the way, a professor at the University of California, I think in Berkeley. Now, he talked about here, the prologue, the unveiling of the American empire. And he says here, our nation, well, this is what George Bush is saying, our nation is the greatest force for good in history. Now, this is what George Bush was saying, that the nation, the United States, is the greatest force for good in history. And we know that it has done some good in terms of its constitution and the freedoms that it declared therein. However, again, we said that we can't always judge a man by what is written in a document, in a secret document. Remember now that the Jews, they worship their Torah, and that is what they worship. They didn't worship the God of the Torah, right? They worship the Torah. And I think to a large extent, Americans tend to worship their Constitution and not, you know, they don't want to do the deeds of the Constitution. They don't want to perform the deeds of the Constitution. They just want to talk about the Constitution, right? But we have to perform the deeds of the Constitution in terms of what the Constitution says we ought or ought not to do. Now, Chalmers opens by saying, as distinct from other peoples on this earth, most Americans do not recognize or do not want to recognize, and I think a lot more do not want to recognize that the United States dominates the world through its military power. Right? Now, this is what Chandler Johnson is saying, and he's right that the United States dominates the world through its military power. You know, due to a government secrecy, they are often ignorant of the fact, right? Well, I should say due to government secrecy. So the government, as a result of its military power, hides information from you, not due to but due to government secrecy. So there is a vast government secrecy, in terms of divulging important matters to the American people. So when you're reading your New York Times and your Washington Post, well, those are dead. But, before this was written in 2004, it doesn't mean that you are actually getting information and you're listening to your MSNBCs because they are aligned with this military apparatus. So due to government secrecy, they are often ignorant of the fact that their government garrisons the globe, right? So this word here, garrisons, it's almost like a criminal. It gives you this criminal overtone, right? That's what it does. It gives you this, this aura of criminality, right? That's what it gives you. And that is what it does. It garrisons the globe. They do not realize the vast network of American military bases on every continent except Antarctica actually constitutes a new form of empire. Because you don't think that, oh, the United States has a colony in Jamaica, or it has a colony in Haiti, or it has a colony. Well, it is still a colony when you look at the fact that it controls what happens in these countries. And we've spoken about the fact that the United States seems to be working on militarizing the Caribbean as we speak, if it has not yet been militarized, right? If it has not yet been militarized. Our country deploys well over 1 million soldiers, spies. See what I'm saying? Spies. So when you're talking about the United States spying on Americans, yes, it has been doing this from a long time, right? So why this fluff right now and the furore in the media? Why? This brouhaha in the media as if, wow, the United States citizens should not be spied on. Well, that has been happening for years, particularly after 9/11. Technicians, teachers, dependents, and civilian contractors in other nations, and just under a dozen carrier task forces in all the oceans and seas of the world, right? So the United States runs the show, right? That is what it does. It controls all the seas and the oceans of the world, right? Well, I should say with some exception, a few exceptions, I should say. Our globe-girding military and intelligence installations bring profits to civilian industries which design and manufacture weapons for the armed force or undertake contract services to build and maintain our far-flung outposts. One task of such contractors is to keep uninformed members of the Imperium housed in comfortable quarters, well-fed, amused, and supplied with enjoyable, affordable vacation facilities. So even the troops that are on the ground are often not aware of the agenda of the military, right? So that is their quest. Their major quest is to keep the troops, right, uninformed, right? You will probably observe things, but you might think that you're doing it in the interest of America and the American people, right? And that is what Chandler Johnson is saying. The new American empire has been a long time in the making, right? So it's not that we just got here. How did we get here? It has been a long time in the making. Its roots go back to the early 19th century, right? So this is right long time ago that the United States was on its way to becoming a global empire. When the United States declared all of Latin America and in its sphere of influence. So it declared all of Latin America as its sphere of influence and busily enlarged its own territory at the expense of the indigenous peoples of North America, right? So this is what was happening when they were talking about the what's the thing now? It just eluded me. The law that they actually enacted back then, right? So that is what it's about. So it was saying that Latin America and the Caribbean, that zone of influence belonged to the United States. Well, they did not claim the Caribbean in that time because, of course, you had other empires that were, such as the British Empire, that controlled Jamaica and Trinidad and other outposts that it had. So it couldn't fight then the British Empire. But as soon as the British Empire weakened and died, then it could and has been controlling that sphere. Also, the Monroe Doctrine, that was what I was sort of, it seemed to have eluded me. The Monroe Doctrine was declared a long time ago, sometime in the 19th century, right? So we know that the United States was on a quest, even then, right? Maybe not yet for full spectrum dominance, but at least to control, right, this hemisphere, the hemisphere of the Americas, right? So you should understand that now. So they influence and busily enlarge its own territory at the expense of the indigenous people of North America, as well as British, French, and Spanish colonialists and neighboring Mexico. And we know that the United States controlled Mexico, well, it stole a lot of Mexican territory in the 19th century, the beginning of the Mexican-American War in 1848, thereabout, right? We had that war. And it's not because America had to fight with Mexico. They went to war with Mexico because they wanted their territory, right? And do you know that it was as a result of that, and most historians will tell you that after the US-Mexican War and, the US, got a lot of Mexican territory, which are right now are part of American states, that was also that war precipitated also the Civil War, because as the United States was expanding, it wanted to expand slavery on these territories. And this is what now, created that huge rift between the North and the South. The Northerners did not want the Southerners to expand slavery because they thought that they were going to still continue to control the American Congress and also to just bring slavery across American territory, right? And then America was going to be known as a slave country, right? It was already a slaveholding country, but, it was in the South and probably a few places in the North. So, Americans perhaps did not find it to be unbearable, intolerable, right? But think about it now that all these new lands, these acquired lands that you've gained from warring with the Mexican people, that you're going to bring slaves over there, right? It was a no-no for many of the Northerners, right? They did not want the expansion of slavery, but, they were okay with slavery if slavery was just maintained in the South, right? That was the whole argument, or the tenet of the argument that they were having back then. All right, so Americans devoted much energy to displaying the original inhabitants of the North American continent, they were displacing the original inhabitants of the North American continent and turning over their lands to new settlers. So that was what it is about, right? Displacing people, right? And then moving them off their territory, off their land. With the Second World War, our nation emerged as the richest and most powerful on earth and a self-designator successor of the British Empire. So from then, the United States was saying now that we have now, succeeded the British Empire. But as enthusiastic as some of our wartime leaders, particularly President Franklin D. Roosevelt, were for the task, the American people were not, right? So while the leaders were for the task, the American people, and I think they just did not know what's happening. They demanded that the country demobilize its armies and turn the nation's attention to full employment and domestic development. So the citizens wanted the country, all right, to continue as a republic. But the leaders, that's military leaders and the political, and some of our political leaders wanted the nation to go into that mode of becoming an empire. Peace did not last long, however. The Cold War and the growing conviction that vital interests, even national survival, demanded the containment of the Soviet Union helped turn on informal empire begun during World War II into hundreds of installations around the world for the largest military we ever maintained in peacetime. Right? So even in peacetime, the United States had a large military empire. Now, let's look at the article here, the big money, right? This is coming from Al Jazeera, and this was written in 2014, right? 2014. Chalmers wrote his book in 2004, and this article was written in 2014 on January 11th, 2014, to be specific. So big money behind war, the military-industrial complex, right? And they are more than 50 years after President Eisenhower's warning, Americans find themselves in perpetual war, right? Which means, therefore, that the wars will not end, all right? In January 1961, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower used his farewell address to warn the nation of what he viewed as one of its greatest threats, the military-industrial complex, composed of military contractors and lobbyists perpetuating war. Eisenhower warned that an immense military establishment and a large arms industry had emerged as a hidden force in U.S. politics, and that Americans must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. So even then, in 1961, when President Eisenhower, former president, was debating office, right, he warned Americans against this gigantic military empire, right? I think that Americans could not, at the time, see. I think even up to the 1990s, Americans did not understand what the US was doing, and perhaps still do not want to recognize, as Chalmers Johnson has suggested, even though you have loads of evidence right before your eyes that these things are taking place around the world. But Americans are so much caught up in their distractions that they don't care. The speech may have been Eisenhower's most outrageous and prophetic moment. 50 years and some later, Americans find themselves in what seems like a perpetual war. No sooner do we draw down on operations in Iraq than leaders demand an intervention in Libya or Syria or Iran. And it does not matter what president is in office, right? It doesn't matter if it's a Republican president or a Democratic president. The wars continue unabated. And Americans need to ask themselves that question: why are we putting so much effort into voting for these candidates when both of them continue the wars unabated? And wars are going to lead to poverty. Wars are going to lead to the restriction on liberties, on domestic liberties. And, you know, a lot of us are so selfish as human beings. We don't care if they go and maim and, you know, and pillage and plunder other countries. But as soon as it gets to our shore, then is when we begin to become preoccupied. And Americans have that selfish disposition, right? Oh, it's in Iraq, or it's in Libya, it's in Afghanistan. Americans are kicking some butt, right? And that's okay for you. And then when after that has happened and they move now to the shore, to American shore, you begin now to act nervously and I don't know what is happening. The world is ending, you know. So don't you think that the people in Afghanistan and the people in Iraq and Iran and all these places and Haiti and Gaza area are people? Don't you think that they are people like you and that you are no special than any other person on this planet, right? And one of the things that also really makes me a little bit perturbed. I see people who should know better, people who have come from these countries, who have emerged from these countries, and they go to America and behave the same way, right? Behave the same way, as if they do not understand the issues and should understand the issues much more than the average American does. While perpetual war constitutes perpetual losses for families and ever-expanding budgets, it also represents perpetual profits for a new and larger complex of business and government interests, right? So when you talk about, oh, I'm happy America did not win that war, or America has not won a war since the Cold War or since 9/11. I mean, when you're talking about America has not won a war or has lost the war, yeah, who has lost the war? Yes, the citizens are the losers here. But these political elites and their economic enablers have won the war in the sense that they have made billions of dollars. And they continue because of that, because the wars are perpetual, they continue to extort and to extract billions of dollars in taxes and other expenses from American citizens without their even understanding what is happening, right? So when you talk about America, you have to separate. Are you talking about the elites? Are you talking about the ordinary civilian? You've got to make that separation. The same thing in Haiti, the same thing in Jamaica. You've got to always make these separations, because these people are not representing you. The elites are not representing the ordinary citizen's interest. In fact, I've told you already that they loathe the ordinary citizen in their countries or of their countries, right? Because if American elites loved the American citizen, do you think that they'll be doing this? No. But by doing so, they can control the wealth, right? The wealth can be transferred back into the hands of the American elites. Because remember now that the entire system was upended in America after the Civil War. And I think that since after the Civil War, and when the elites saw what happened, and some of them, particularly the ones in the South, killed themselves, they committed suicide, they worked to get back that system. We talked about how the treason that Andrew Johnson had done, and the fact that he, even though the Southerners were traitors and were considered by the Northerners to have been traitors, that Andrew Johnson secretively, right, invited them to Congress because he wanted to show them now that he's the boss. And he ran the show at the time. And as a result of that, the Southerners were able to come back, and they were able to unite again, slowly but surely, with their fellow Northern elites. And then they actually had a compromise. I think the compromise was eventually made in 1877, right? So the elites came back together in unity against the ordinary American people. The new military-industrial complex is fueled by a conveniently ambiguous and unseen enemy, the terrorist. So they have to tell you that there is always a terrorist. In your shoes, it's going to be in your pants, it's going to be in your mouth. And very soon when we're going to the airports, our mouths will have to be opened up, and they need to see if there's a terrorist inside, right? Our eyes have to be inspected too, because perhaps the terrorists got somewhere in, in the eyes, right? Where are we going? It's almost like that the United States now has become a paranoid nation. Former President George W. Bush and his aides insisted on calling counterterrorism efforts a war. This concerted effort by leaders like former Vice President Dick Cheney, himself the former CEO of defense contractor Halliburton. So that is what they go, the revolving door. So they move from one industry into the presidency and sometimes back into industry. That's how it functions in America. That is how the show is run. And you've got to understand that. So when they move from one industry and these large corporate organizations to the presidency or into politics, they are going to control. What they're there to do is not to really lead a nation, but they're there to defend the interest of these large corporations. They're lobbyists, really. A lot of our politicians in Congress are really lobbyists. They're lobbying for their corporate donor and sponsor. And that is what you need to understand. As far as they're concerned, you are some slaves. You are some slaves. It doesn't matter if you're white or you're black or you're yellow. You are slaves. And that is why the national debt is being augmented and nobody really cares about what's going on. Was not some empty rhetorical exercise. Not only would a war maximize the inherent powers of the president, but it would maximize the budgets for military and homeland agencies. So when we also have wars, and more wars that are waged, the presidency is exalted, right? The office of the presidency is exalted on a footing of a monarch, right? So the American president is fast becoming a monarch. And that is why when President Trump got to office, he was so much like enthralled. He was, wow, he was living in the soup of American power. And he reveled in it. He loved it, right? Because that's his personality. He loved to be on top of the world. And when he saw the powers, now give him his credit, he did not really exploit it as he could have, right? And some of the times when we look at these presidents, you know what the Bible says. The Bible says that the angels in the four winds, right? The angels are holding back the winds of strife. So even though President Trump might have wanted to exercise some powers that he shouldn't have exercised, these angels in those four corners of the world are holding him back or held him back, and says that you cannot use that power now until the people of God are sealed. And this is what we have to understand, that there's some dynamics happening. They want to push an agenda, and angels, that's God's angels, are holding them back. And even though they think that they're high and mighty, God's power is greater. But we cannot deny the fact that one day these angels are going to let go. God is going to tell them to let go. And then we are going to have chaos reigning on this world. So if you think your leaders are in charge, you've got to rethink your position. This new coalition of companies, agencies, and lobbyists dwarfs the system known by Eisenhower when he warned Americans to guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. Ironically, it has had some of the best days under President Barack Obama, one of America's greatest presidents. Wow. Who has radically expanded has radically expanded drone attacks and claimed that he alone determines what a war is for the purposes of consulting Congress. So he, the president, should be given that power to determine what a war is or it's not. And then Congress will be consulted. Not that Congress should define the war and should define whether or not the president should go to war, but the president has that power to define to Congress what a war is or is not. Something that we need to understand, right? And this was done by your boy, right? The greatest president that ever lived, except maybe apart from President Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, right? Remember when he was running for the presidency, and they kept on, talking about Abraham Lincoln and his freeing of the slaves, emancipating the slaves, and all of the foolishness that the media houses had to say. Now, investment in homeland security companies is expected to yield a 12% annual growth through 2013, an astronomical return when compared to other parts of the tanking economy, right? So the question is being asked, is the military-industrial complex good for the economy? Some people say it is. War is good for the economy. That's what they tell you. But good for whom, right? When they say, for example, that there's economic growth for whom? We've always got to ask that question. For whom? Is it for me or is it for the elites? Right? Always ask that question and do your research. While few politicians are willing to admit it, we don't just endure wars, we seem to need war. Right? You need the war. The military-industrial complex needs the war, just like we need oxygen to survive. The military-industrial complex needs war to be able to survive. So if it doesn't have a war, what does it do? It creates that war, right? And a lot of what you see happening now, the wars that are being waged and the wars that are about to be waged, right, have been manufactured. They're not real. They're not what you probably would call a natural war. They are, yeah, they're made up war. They're artificial wars. And you do not understand that because you think that the best thing to do is to sit in your living rooms and listen to MSNBC and the CNNs of the world and read the New York Times and pretend as if you're intelligent, right? That is the hypocrisy of the world in which we live. You know, I want to say something right now. The problems that are in the world, the politics and the economics that we practice in the world right now will not be able to solve them. The problems that we are being confronted with in the world right now, we're facing politics, neither politics nor economics will be able to solve them, right? Because it's not rooted and grounded in truth. The politics and the economics are not rooted and grounded in truth. And we are fast losing our moral compass if we have not already lost it. And that is why we are sinking. We are fast sinking and we're losing our countries. It is not just about economics. We have to have a sense of morality, what is right and what is wrong. And because we live in a system now where everything is relative and we don't know what is right or what is wrong because it's according to you, do it because you like it, right? So if it means therefore you like killing, then do your thing, right? And that is your truth, right? People tend to say that is your truth. So if your truth means killing people and walking over people, exploiting people, abusing people sexually, do your thing and enjoy your life, right? We no longer recoil at some of these immoral acts and actions. We no longer do that because we have become desensitized, and the media and the shows that you watch, the movies that you watch in these movie theaters are doing that to you. Oh, it's just an art. The movie is just an art, yeah. The music that I'm listening to is just an art, right? Even though they're telling you to kill and to steal and to destroy, you don't care because it's just a movie. And what is in a movie? Not understanding that your brain has what you call a subconscious part to it, and it registers in your unconsciousness, that subconscious part of your brain, all of the things that you see. And when you least expect it, maybe you are going to react to that particular stimuli or stimulus, right? A study showed that that roughly 75% of the fallen in these wars come from the working class families. They do not need war. They pay the cost of the war. So the cost of the war is paid by the working class people, not the middle and upper echelons of society. Across the country, the war-based economy can be seen in an industry which includes everything from homeland security, educational degrees, to counterterrorism consultants to private-run preferred traveler programs for the airport security gates, right? So even academia, right, is controlled by the military. And you know that, if you want to have grants in the United States, if you're working at universities, anything that has to do with the military, all right? Right? Anything that has to do with defense, that means that word defense, then you will get lots of grants, right? Lots of money, right? But you must understand that your research is going to be controlled, because the Defense Department doesn't want to say things that they don't want you to say. So your research is controlled. And you're not really making any scholastic contribution to academia, because your research is controlled. Recently, the black budget of secret intelligence programs alone was estimated at $52.6 billion for 2013. That's the black budget alone. With all these wars now being waged in 2024, we don't know that this article was written in 2014, what the black budget is. No one knows because it is secret. That is only the secret programs, not the much larger intelligence and counterintelligence budgets. We now have 16 spy agencies that employ over 107,000 employees. This is separate from over 1 million people employed by the military and national security law enforcement agencies. So all of these agencies are intertwined or interconnected, and that is something Americans need to understand, right? And that is why if they're spying on foreigners, they are going to spy on you too. They are going to spy on you too, because you're not special to them, right? These guys are about dominating, right? It's not about, oh, I love Americans more than I love Dominicans, right? It's about dominating the global population. The core of this expanding complex is an index, or axis rather, of influence of corporations, lobbyists, and agencies that have created a massive, self-sustaining, terror-based industry. A massive, right, self-sustaining, terror-based industry. So they have to inflict terror if they want to survive, right? It's almost like criminals, right? They have to make sure that they create very dangerous conditions to survive, because that's how they survive, through criminality. So we have the contractors. In the last 8 years, trillions of dollars have flowed to military and homeland security companies. This homeland thing is a very scary topic, very scary. Should be scary. This should scare the daylights out of people when they talk about homeland security. When the administration starts a war like Libya, it is a windfall for companies who are given generous contracts to produce everything from replacement missiles to ready-to-eat meals, right? So this is what happens. These people are not joking. And you and I are the ones who are joking. So I just wanted to point this out. I can't read the entire article, right? But what I want to say is that Americans need to wake up, right? Americans need to wake up. Listen to what this is saying. Even with polls showing that the majority of Americans are opposed to continuing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the new military-industrial complex continues to easily muster the necessary support from both Democrats and Republicans in Congress, right? Because at the end of the day, they sit in Congress and they laugh at the American people, because the American people do not want to educate themselves. They think that going to a four-year university and getting some degrees And bagging them and going to a job means that you are educated and you understand what is going on in the world. And that is not how education works, right? The large majority of our people in the world are not truly educated. Because if we were, a lot of what our leaders are doing could have been averted, right? But we are comfortable living on plantations. We are comfortable living on plantations. And some plantations are nicer than some, or more pleasant than some. And the American plantation by far is a little bit more comfortable than what you would have in the other parts of the world. So people are happy, with living on the plantation. What they don't understand is that when the slave rebellions begin, then their entire lives are going to be uprooted. It is a testament to the influence of this alliance that hundreds of billions are being spent in Afghanistan and Iraq, while Congress is planning to cut billions from poor social programs, including a possible rollback on Medicare due to lack of money. None of that matters. It doesn't even matter that Afghan President Hamid Karzai has called the US the enemy and said he wishes that he had joined the Taliban. Even the documented billions stolen by government officials in Iraq and Afghanistan are treated as a mere cost of doing business, right? So it is what Eisenhower described as the misplaced power of the military-industrial complex, power that makes public opposition and even thousands of dead soldiers immaterial, right? They don't care about your protesting. So you can go out there and you whine and dine, you have these big protests. And what's going to happen of it? Nothing. 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 Because they control the media and they control all the major institutions of America, including academic sector, right? All of these institutions are controlled by the military-industrial complex. So war may be hell for some, but it is heaven for others in a war-dependent economy. In a war-dependent economy. In a war-dependent economy. Right? It is sad that Americans and their economy depends on war. The American economy rather, depends on war, and war is a slaughter of many people, of many innocent lives, many innocent civilians. And Americans, you can live a decent life by the murder, the slaughter, the deliberate slaughter of hundreds of thousands, if not billions of people, and many do not care. Or as Chalmers suggested, many have not yet recognized because they're sleeping. When you listen to the typical American, the average American opens up his or her mouth, it's seconds in terms of what comes from their mouths, right? There's nothing profound, nothing that is substantive comes from their mouth. Yet they think that they are superior or they live in a superior society. By whose standard? By whose standard? Right? It is time for Americans to open up their eyes to understand that to whom much is given, much is required. And for a long time, it's been just a playground. The United States is just a grand theater or a grand comedy where people are just there, entertained, being constantly entertained. And even in the classrooms right now, if you're a teacher, and I understand, everybody wants to be entertained. It's no time for serious discussions and being serious. Everything has to be and this kind of constant laughter like Heinz. And you laugh at the vice president, what's her name, Kamala Harris, but she emerged from you. That is exactly what Americans are about. Not serious people, as they used to be. Right? As they used to be, no longer a country of largely serious people. Everything is a laugh. And don't get me wrong, there is a time and place for everything under the sun. As Solomon says, a time to laugh and a time to mourn, a time to be serious and a time to just be relaxed, right? But I think that we're living in a society in which this is just this constant cackling and giggling, right? It's time for us now to get our acts together, to get our lives in order, to understand that we're not living in paradise, as some Americans like to think. Whether you're in Jamaica or you're in Guyana or you're in, Trinidad and Tobago, you are not living in paradise. And I like to think of these nations that I've just called as outposts of the US empire, right? They're really outposts of the US empire. It is an empire, and it's not going to go down without a fight and without bloody streets, right? Because it has reached, it's now at the apex of its existence, right? So how did we get here? We got here because years from the 19th century, from 1898, during the Cuban-American War, right? Or Spanish-American War, I should say. Yeah, because even though it was fought over Cuba, but it was really the Spanish against the Americans. Because, the Cubans wanted Spain to leave and Spain didn't want to leave. So, according to what history tells us, the Cubans enlisted the support of Americans, right? The only thing is that when Americans went down there, after they got the Spanish out, they wanted to control. And that is what happens because it's a war. And who is going to control the resources of this country? Is it Britain? Is it France? Is it, the Spanish? And people think that they are living in sovereign, independent countries, and understanding that we have been surrounded by wars. I mean, is there a time that you have not heard about a war? We think we live in relative peace, and we have to some extent since the 1990s. But every year there's some war being waged, in some far-flung country, in the Middle East, right? In Africa. And shouldn't we be concerned about these wars? Because we were not concerned about them. Now the wars have arrived to our shores. Because what is happening over there in Haiti, is going to have some serious repercussions for not only our economies, but our political freedoms, right? Because now in Haiti, presidential councils have been normalized against the wishes of the people. But they will tell you that, oh, that's what we're there to do, to install a presidential council so that you are able to get back your democracy. Not understanding that once your democracy has been lost, it's lost forever. It's lost forever. Right? And that is what you've got to understand. The little remnants that you're seeing of freedom here and there does not mean that you are safe. Right? Does not mean that you are safe. And I can't understand for the life of me how we have experienced what we experienced 4 years ago. And many of us still continue to trust our politicians and our leaders, right? It baffles me. It boggles the mind. But it's a show that, something is wrong with the brain and with how our brain functions, right? Something is wrong with the brain. The brain is not working as it should be working. It is not definitely alert, right? It's time to wake up. Time to smell the coffee. And time to get your acts together. The US is an empire. Empire does not mean that they're nice. Some nice guys were trying to protect you, as some Americans even believe to this day. Some guys were trying to use their military to defend their borders and to protect them, right? An empire will kill, right? We saw what they did to Christ was under the Roman Empire. By the way, do you know that we're still under the Roman Empire? We are still on the United States. It's just an extension of the Roman Empire, right? We are still under the Roman Empire. And that is why the most brilliant being in the universe, God himself, declared and described America in Revelation 13 as an image to the beast, right? Because the beast itself was the Roman Empire. And America is just a reflection of the Roman Empire. And go to Washington, D.C., and it's clear. Even the physical structure or infrastructure resembles that of Rome. And that was not done because, it was not just done because it was, people just wanted to be like, it was done intentionally. It was done intentionally. And the founding fathers, even though, bless God, bless their hearts, they wanted to live in a free society, but they had a fascination, right? A profound fascination for the Roman Empire, right? They had that fascination. And who wouldn't? Because we know that the Roman Empire was that iron empire that controlled the world and subjugated lots of peoples and their civilizations. So the US is on that quest, as we have here suggested many times, full spectrum dominance. She wants to dominate. She likes to bully. But we know that very soon, if we do not speak out, that we also will be bullied when the troops show up at our gates. Thank you so much for joining. Please be sure to like, to share, to subscribe, and to leave a thoughtful comment. Please like the videos. YouTube now is everything depends, based on what I'm seeing, depends on the likes. So smash the like button, because that is how the videos are going to be shared on the platform, right? We are not liking the videos as we ought to. We need to like the video, show the presenter, the creator of the content, that you appreciate what they have done, the time and the effort that they have invested to make the videos. Particularly, for the life of me, I see people putting likes on lots of pranks and stupidity on the internet. Where is the brain? But when you're hearing content like this, you're not interested in, clicking the like button, smashing the like buttons, because guess what? It's nothing to entertain you. That is who we are. Don't blame Kamala Harris, because if you're doing that, you're just behaving. You're just like Kamala Harris, who likes to giggle and having nothing to bring to the fore. Thank you so much. Have a great day. See you in the next video.